All right, good afternoon, everyone. This is Colin Glover from Sera-Brynn. I believe we've given everybody hopefully enough time to get joined. Also on the phone with me is Sam Morthland, and he'll be doing some of this presentation. As you know, hopefully as everybody knows, the official Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification Framework came out last week, or I think so, a week and a half ago now, actually. And so we've all been reading that greatly, and we're all very excited about this process. We'll be mostly focusing on the CMMC. Sam's going to lead off with some of the timelines and some of the questions that have come up already. To be honest, we know what we know at this point. Hopefully, if somebody's on here who knows better than we do, please speak up or at least submit a question or a comment so that we can address those. All right, without further ado, if this will work for me. All right, again, just to cover this super quick, everybody should know this by now. There is the DFARS rule currently, 252.204-7012, requiring the implementation of 800.171, as well as incident response and some cloud requirements. Everybody should know this by now. That hasn't worked so well, so the DoD has come out with the CMMC, which we expect to roll out this summer. It's still a little bit fuzzy on how that's all going to happen. Sam's going to address that in just a second. But at the end of the day, over the next several years, we're going to have this requirement coming out across the DIB. It's going to apply to every company within the defense industrial base, from the huge primes to mom and pop shops. Come back to the timeline a little bit, and we'll get that sorted out. All right, so we'll talk about CMMC itself, the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification Framework. All right, how does it compare to 171? Primarily, or not primarily, but a difference is there are now 17 domains in CMMC compared to the 14 families of 171. They've introduced these 3 domains: the asset management, recovery, and situational awareness. Each of those domains, what we would have called families under 171, are divided up into levels of control, levels 1 through 5, and each level is going to have a certain amount of controls. There may be controls at level 1, there may not be. There may be controls at level 5, there may not be. We're really focused on level 3 for the most part, and we'll come back to that in a little bit. The level 3 is CUI. There's obviously a typo on my slide, but you can't increase your level until you fulfilled both the capability and maturity at that level. And we'll come back to maturity in a little bit. So I copied this verbiage straight out of the CMMC. The majority of practices are from 800.171 and the FAR clause. So those 110 controls that we're all well familiar with from 171. Level 1 is equivalent to the safeguarding requirements in the FAR clause. And at level 3, we're building on levels 1 and 2, and it includes all of the 800-171 controls plus the 20 additional practices. Maturity-wise and capability-wise, at level 1, they're not going to score you on maturity. And maybe it's a question already, what is level 1? It's everybody within the defense industrial base who does not have CUI. If you have CUI, you will be at a minimum level 3. Everybody else will be at level 1. If you've attended the DoD briefings or some of the other briefings on this, they use a good example. If you're doing landscaping for a Navy base, you may not have CUI, but you will have access to various information from the DoD, which will put you up there. Or you may have sensitive information or somewhat sensitive information. So that's the reason you have to protect that. Again, though, there is no maturity rating at that level 1. The level 2, you have policies and procedures. Level 3, you're actually going to validate against those policy procedures. 4, we start getting into some of the maturity improvement, maturity resolution, and then level 5, activities are standardized across all applicable organizational units. So you're leading edge at that point. From the capability side, the technical side, level 1, again, is the FAR. You have basic cyber hygiene. Level 2, That's come up quite a bit. And take it for what it's worth, it's make-believe. It's a stepping stone from level 1 to 3. According to the last briefing I went to, almost no contracts should have a level 2 in them. It is to provide a planning mechanism for a company or organization to move from level 1 to level 3. Again, level 3 is 171 plus 20 additional ones we're going to touch on in a second. Level 4 and 5 are those very high-end programs. On the flip side, very few companies are going to be subject to level 4 and 5, supposedly. These are the actual domains. Again, transition from 171 verbiage is, we would have called these families, we're now calling them domains. So you have the domain, you'll have the capability, and then you'll have practices in support of them. So if we look at access control, you have system access requirements, internal, remote, and data access. And then each of those capabilities are further subdivided into the individual practices. So again, looks very similar to the 171 control families. You have the situational awareness, recovery, and the asset management as being the additional ones as compared to 171. All right, so I wanted to touch on these because there are the 20 additional controls from 171. My assumption is that everybody on here is very familiar with 171, so we wanted to discuss these new practices. First one under asset management is define procedures for the handling of CUI data. One thing to keep in mind is that when it says define in any of these requirements is you have to have some sort of documentation to go alongside with it. We would call this a CUI management plan. You can call it any number of things, information management, something along those lines, but there has to be a set of procedures for the handling. The audit ones are kind of enhancements to the existing audit requirements. Review your audit logs, just don't collect them. And then you'll have to collect that audit information into a central repository. There has to be some sort of log management. It can't just sit on the endpoints. So of note, in the recovery side, so one is perform and test data backups. This is completely new. A change from .7 to 1.0 is .7 required offsite and offline backups. 1.0 is now requiring resilient data backups. So you can kind of define what you have to do at that point. Incident response, quite a bit of focus on the additional controls where it's incident response. So detect and report, analyze and triage, good practices. Have defined SOPs for your incident response. That's important under 2.096. And again at 2.097, perform root cause analysis on incidents. One note before I forget, because I thought it was cool, is they have changed the numbering structure from the DRAS to 1.0. So you have the domain abbreviation, then you have the level, and then you have the individual practice. So a .2 is a level 2, a .3 is a level 3, so on and so forth. All right, risk management, a couple of new controls there as well. Perform risk assessments to identify, develop and implement risk mitigation plans, manage non-vendor supported products. So these are all great things. That manage non-vendor supported products is important. A reminder, Windows 7 recently hit end of life, unless you got the extended support. So bear that in mind as we move along. CA.3.162, if you're developing software internally, you have to do a security assessment of that software. That's important. It's not software going outside of your business unit or corporation. It's things that you've developed internally. How far does this go down? I don't know at this point. You know, or if you're creating macros for Excel, does that count? I'm not sure, but it's certainly something to take a look at. SC.2.179, using encrypted sessions for network devices, that's a good idea. This one got a lot, SA.3.169, received a lot of attention during the comment period I saw. So who are those stakeholders you have to communicate with? That's good information to know. The explanations within CMMC are great. If you've not had a chance, please go down to the appendices of CMMC and read through and review those explanations that are provided. That is such a significant lift from the guys that wrote CMMC compared to what we had before. Huge fan of those. 3.192, DNS filtering services. If you've seen the news, that's going to be important. 3.193, implement a policy restricting publication of CUI on externally owned websites, forums, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter. That's important. I've seen plenty of time where individuals have posted inappropriate material, and I know a couple of years ago, somebody from the military service had issues for posting inappropriate photos on their Facebook feed. So keep in mind on that, and implement that into your handbooks. Employee spam protection, good. Email forgery, and utilize sandboxing. Some of the forums I follow, that's going to be interesting, and that may not be simple, or it may be trivial to implement. We'll see how that goes. All right, so one thing I wanted to note while we go through this, again, from the CMMC standpoint, are the processes. This is your maturity. So you have to have a policy that includes domain name. So each domain should have a policy associated with it. Each practice should be addressed within your policy, and then have a plan that includes your domain name, that includes the domain name. So for each domain, access control, audit and accountability, asset management, training, each one should be addressed separately in a policy, procedure, and plan. Now, if you go down and look at the additional information in the appendices, it doesn't have to be a separate document. They can overlap, they can exist in the same place, but each one has to be documented separately. So that's going to be kind of a big lift for a lot of folks, but it is important to have all of it traced and written, so that, one, you have evidence for your audit, but two, without policy, things get ad hoc, things get sideways, so it's important to have that documentation in place. Sam, are you there?
All right, Colin, I'm up.
All right.
Figured it out.
Good. So let's jump back to your slide, Sam.
Okay, sorry about that, everybody. So what I was teeing up initially was this slide came from the briefing that Katie Arrington gave with Ms. Lord, Mr. Fahey on the 31st at the DoD at 8 o'clock in the morning, which was kind of an early press conference, where they released 1.0. And the big takeaways from this calendar is they're on schedule, but they're still waiting. The accreditation body is still being formed. They've got the 12 board members, but they're doing a lot of stuff. And if you can think about it, they're setting up an entire company. So they're finding workspaces, doing everything else, in addition to working on the pathfinders and the training material they're supposed to get from the government. So there's a lot of things happening that's getting compressed in the February and March timeframe. But they're expecting by the end of February to have that MOU signed, and then they'll start coming things out. So they're going to do some of the initial training of the Pathfinder auditors to go through the training program in April and May. But as I think we're still looking for the initial RFIs to come out in June, the very top line, with the RFPs coming out in October. And we'll talk a little bit about how wide that's going to be. But this slide came straight from there, and right now they're on schedule. So, Colin, next. Okay, so the industrial base has 300,000 contractors. Most of those are small businesses that are going to be down in the level 2, level 1 areas. So it just gives you an idea of how many companies that this is going to affect, and it's going to be take years to roll out. And if you see down there further, got a 5-year rollout plan, kind of like what they're expecting. The model they're expecting to follow is the ISO 9001 rollout, and that everybody will be compliant by 2026. The first year, they're just looking at relative numbers on numbers of contracts. So where they got 1,500 was 150 contractors times 10 contracts, will give you 1,500 contractors that have to be certified in the first year, because they're going to pick 10 to 15 contracts to do the very first year in a handful of areas, particularly missile defense and some specific cybers, to then get people going in the process. And because they're just starting, you're not going to have to be certified when you submit your RFP, but you will have to be certified at time of award, and you'll have to prove it with your certificate number. So they're building some time into this. As I mentioned, the accreditation board has been formed. They have their own webpage at CMMCAB.org, and they're doing a pretty good job keeping updated what they're doing up there. And they're very open to industry input. So if you have any questions or input into the processes, please sign up for their newsletter. You can go to their webpage and sign up for their newsletter. And all the details of who's going to be audited, how they're going to be audited, and what's going to be used is all going to be established by the accreditation board. So you can tell that their plate is pretty full, and things will come out. And I think right now they are forecasting to still be running on schedule, but they've got a lot of stuff to do. Next slide. Again, what we don't know who the 1,500 contractors are going to be, because we're not sure on which opportunities are going to come out. Who will be next on the list? There's what they're going to have now is they're going to have a couple they're going to have Pathfinder auditors, but there's not going to be enough available to do the entire community. So they're going to have to do a prioritized through that marketplace. If you saw on the first slide, the accreditation board is going to set up the auditors that are accredited, and then the companies will go to them to get certified. So we're waiting to see how they're going to put out the list of which opportunities and then which companies can and how they can be vetted on it, so that they can focus the limited auditors and assessors that have been certified in CMMC to focus on only those companies that are going to that first tranche of bids. So there's going to be more information that will be coming from the accreditation board. Who will be doing the certification? Again, certification is going to be done by private companies, not the government, but the accreditation board is going to certify the auditors, and they're going to go through additional training. That training has not been established, and the accreditation has not been established yet for the auditors. So they're starting this Pathfinder program to start training the auditors in April, May, first tranche of the initial Pathfinders, and the Pathfinders are there to be people who are already experienced auditors and other standards to provide input back into the program for auditor certification, and that they're expecting the certifier training through, and these are the details they haven't ironed out yet. We don't know who's actually going to be teaching it, if they're going to contract it out to another company, or how they're going to do it. But the certifier training will start in the early summer time frame. So like we showed on the calendar, is the RFIs on these first initial 10 contracts will come out in June. The auditors are being trained over the summer. The RFPs for those first 10 or 15 contracts will come out in October, probably for a 60-day later submission for award in the early spring of 2021, and that's when the companies that have bid on it need to be certified. So there's going to be more than a year to get up for those companies to get up and ready. What's the relationship between DCMA audits and CMMC? That right now, DCMA, under their business practices audits, are looking at your SSP and your POAM in compliance with 7012. And the idea being is, if DCMA has looked at it and said you're compliant with 7012, initially you're going to be, those results will be accepted. They haven't really specified if there's going to be a differential requirement going down the road, or how long the DCMA audit will be good for. They're saying the CMMC audit is good for 3 years. Your certification will be good for 3 years with yearly audits. So not sure how long the DCMA audit's going to be good for, but more details and specificity on that will come in the future. But no, if you're getting a DCMA business system audit now, they will ask you for a copy of your SSP and your current POAM showing progress towards full compliance. Next slide. Okay, so basically what I was going to highlight, my highlight disappeared, but level 3 is where most, and Collins mentions, where most everybody's going to live, and the foot stomper is right there in the middle, is that you've got NIST 800-171, revision 1, is the foundation for that. So you have to comply with the FAR now and all your current DFARs, which will be DFAR 7012 as previously mentioned. That's the starting point, because the constant question I always get is, how do you prepare for CMMC now that it's out? Even though we've got some time to get compliant, you need to get your DFAR 7012 house in order. You need to get 800-171 complete so that you don't have a POAM. Your SSP is complete and you've got all the security practices going. That's the best preparation to get, and then you start working on the next 20 practices to get you to CMMC if you believe you're going to be in that market, and you can take some time to get there. So that was the main point from this slide. Next slide.
So I think we've hit your slide, Sam, and we'll skip it. And so again, as mentioned, for updates on the accreditation board, it's cmmcab.org. And then the DoD has their list of frequently asked questions. Those are good things. Please go to that website. If you have other esoteric questions, feel free to hit us. And there's a lot of companies, a lot of organizations that are quite interested in CMMC, and will be happy to help you. Again, though, look at the appendices from CMMC and begin reading those practice descriptions. That's going to be probably the best help. It's going to be confusing. It's going to be hard, but we're all going to get through it. All right. And Sam, if you want to talk to these, again, the cost thing keeps coming up.
Yeah, and it's still keeping it as an allowable cost, as it always has been. There's been no talk of making it a direct reimbursable cost. There has been some discussion, and we've seen, I guess, some agencies starting to put money aside to help particular business in the cyber world with some of their initial costs, maybe through like a grant. So there are some creative things happening out there where the government's trying to help some small, innovative businesses get along with it. So the cost discussion is ongoing for that one. Who's going to audit? I think we talked about this.
Yeah, I think we fit the other two.
Yeah. Yep, we fit the other two. If you have any questions, just ask them.
Yeah, so I think, we'll skip this slide a little bit, I know there's quite a few questions already and comments, so if you want to start addressing those.
Okay, so first question I have is, how will the CMC level of a joint venture be determined? At one presentation, Katie had indicated, and again, this is going to come out in detailed documents later by the accreditation board, that they were going to follow the model of the joint venture. It's kind of like your own independent certification. So if the joint venture is its own business entity, then it has to receive its own certification for its own systems. But again, that was all up for discussion, waiting further guidance coming out. So kind of a murky answer. I haven't heard a clear answer on that. Okay, so let's see. On the other side, I've got, does the CMMC contemplate companies having increased smaller aspects of the computing environments that meet higher CMMC level requirements? Colin, why don't you talk to that one? I think that's about enclaving.
Yeah, absolutely. And enclaving is supported within and encouraged within the CMMC. It certainly talks about the various security domains. And once you go into level 4 and 5, it's even more clearly defined. But I would anticipate that if you have level 5, you would put that into a level 5 segment. Your level 3 would be a bigger segment of your network, and level 1 would be the corporate. I think there's going to be, going forward, especially between level 3 and level 1, how that's divided up. It's just an easier, better way to go about it oftentimes, to have your level 3 or your CUI network segmented from your main corporate network. It's certainly supported both within current 171 as well as CMMC.
Okay. Next question I've had, will subcontractors have to be certified at the same time as the prime contractors on the first 10 or 15 awards? Based on the example that Katie gave on the 1,500 contractors, I would say yes, because again, they were looking at 150 contractors per contract. just kind of as because they were looking at the bigger efforts. So again, it's going to be that from honestly your decision to submit your RFP to contract award, you'll have that amount of time to become compliant. If you are already compliant with DoD or with NIST 800-171, the differential compliance shouldn't take, I mean, it shouldn't be that hard of a lift from there. But so yes, I think everybody's going to, based on their comments, everybody's going to have to be certified at contract award, everybody on that team. And the way the prime will verify that is, they've already talked about this, is that the prime will have to submit copies of the certificates, or at least certificate numbers, of all their subcontractors they've identified. Now, to what tier, they didn't talk about. So more to follow on that, getting how far down the chain. Okay, let's see. DCMA has indicated that the DID CAC audits will continue into the foreseeable future for prioritized programs and industries. Okay, there was only a question, so I have not seen that, but I believe if that's true. Chris, I see that. Okay, so the next one is, who determines what level of subcontractors will have to be certified at, the prime or the DoD sponsor? They talked about this at, not at the press conference, but at a previous presentation, that once the contracting officer identifies the CUI, which is right now one of the problems, to the prime, that the prime is going to have responsibility as part of, is passed down, so that, because the example Katie has given in the past of, you just don't take the entire specification document and hand it to the person that makes the lowest end component. They don't need to see the whole thing. They just need the page that, or specifications for the piece of equipment they're providing. So I think in answer to your question is that the certification level is going to be relative to the CUI. And so if there is no CUI, but there's contract data, and this is where we get into some definitions that still have to be cleaned up in how you pass down information. So if I get information at level 3, what can I actually pass down to a level 1 company from there? So it's part of it is still to be determined, and these are some of the details coming out, I think, as we move forward. Will this webinar be available to view later? Yes, we'll have a video that's posted on our page. All right, Colin, what specifically constitutes segregation for enclaves?
Sure, it's physical or logical separation, or a combination of both. And seeing your question, I went ahead and pulled up. This is AC.4.023 under the CMMC and the appendices. It's a level 4. Organizations mandate specific architectural solutions when required to enforce logical or physical separation. Yada, yada, yada. Enforcement includes prohibiting information transfers between connected systems, employing hardware mechanisms to enforce one-way information flows, and verifying right permissions before accepting information from another security domain or connected system. Again, really, it's an architectural solution to segment out that segment to make sure that the access is restricted in accordance with your requirements.
Okay, barring any further questions, those are all the questions we have on the webinar. I think the biggest thing that we're all waiting for, as I had mentioned, is the accreditation board specifying how the implementation. We've got the standard, we've got the assessment guide for 171 alpha for assessments, and then you've also got the November 2019 CMMC assessment guide that was put out, and it looks a lot like 171 alpha. But you've got some tools out there that you can use to start to get ready as we're waiting for the accreditation board to provide the additional level of details of implementation. So as we've spoken in the past, make sure add to your list of pages to check occasionally is the CMMC accreditation page at cmcab.org, and keep checking the DoD, the PMO, CMMC PMO page. That's where they have 1.0 and all the appendices posted right now. Those are up. Make sure you check those occasionally, or have them give you alerts if they get updated. All right, Colin, I haven't got any other questions. You got anything else?
No, so one thing that we're considering right now is to have a monthly webinar regarding implementation associated with the specific domain. specifically for small and tiny businesses, micro businesses, to sort of come up with the best way forward, the least expensive, most efficient concepts for how to get these controls implemented in a small environment. If that's of interest to anybody, please let me know, and it's something that we can consider hosting once a month. I saw one more question come up. Okay, somebody said it's a good idea. Good, so let us know, and we can drive forward with that. If there's nothing else, thank y'all, and enjoy the rest of your day.